but almost almost at every turn, there's a way I can look back and see how Montgomery College had something to do with it. And that's been, I think, a unifying factor in much of my work.
I believe it has. But what I want to know is, how did a fellow with an appointment to the Naval Academy and a Naval ROTC scholarship to University of Virginia end up at Montgomery College?
You know, that's a huge irony, and that's a good place to start, because I actually, being a Maryland boy, I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and so I did everything I could, including went to Bullis Prep, and I did get an appointment, and as you said, I also had an ROTC appointment and an acceptance at UVA. So I thought I was set. I was going to be a naval officer, and anyway, then I got this wire from the Navy Department and said, "We need to know, are you going to take this NROTC scholarship or not? And you need to let UVA know whether you're going to take it or not." And I was waiting for orders to report to the Naval Academy, and funny thing happened. I did get orders, but they would report to Walter Reed for further eye exams, and they had already told me, "No, you're in." I had called and said, "What's the status?" Said, "No, you're in," but the orders didn't indicate that. And in fact, after doing further eye exam, they said, "No, we're not going to waive your eyes, so you don't have an appointment." So suddenly, in the middle of, let's say I was in July of '67, the Vietnam War was raging, and I didn't have a school to go to. Needless to say, Montgomery College wasn't on my radar screen before, but suddenly it was. And the fun thing for me, looking back, is how fate really played out. I don't know what kind of naval officer I would have made, but it is hard for me to believe that I would have done better in any other avenue than the way it worked out. Montgomery College really did a great job of kind of setting me on the course that I've been on.
So you had a couple of internships at Montgomery College, and one was on Capitol Hill, and the other was with the Frederick News Post. Your first one was on Capitol Hill in the office of Congressman Gilbert Goody from Montgomery County.
And that just had a huge impact on me. And again, this is something that Montgomery College offered. I saw that they posted the fact that they had a couple of summer internships in a congressman's office, and I thought, daggone, I'd like to do that. And I did it. And that really, and the fact that in the congressman's office, they didn't treat us as an intern. I was really given staff responsibilities, and I had to put out a summer newsletter, and I had to respond to press inquiries, and I had constituent mail I had to take care of, just like every other aide in his office. And it was a wonderful experience in several ways. One, it really gave me an inside look at politics and piqued my interest in politics. And two, I had my first real job in a professional setting. And it just, that was an experience that really set the ball in motion. Not only that, but people may not remember it, but at that time, Montgomery County, Maryland, and actually Maryland in general, were heavily Republican. We had Mac Mathias as a senator, J. Glenn Bell as a senator, obviously Goody as a congressman, and we had the county executive was a guy named Jim Gleason, also a Republican. So that really caused me to register as a Republican later and join Young Republicans. And again, all of those things fed into future career so it's quite interesting there. One thing I like to mention too, though, I think it's an interesting story. We kind of skipped over Bullis, but Bullis did too have an formative effect, because I had a couple of real war heroes that made an impact on me in a great way. I had a Marine general teaching me math for the first 3 or 4 years. This guy was extraordinary. His name was General Shapley. And he was extraordinary for what he did and how he survived. To begin with, I had never seen anybody that I knew that had been on television. But on the 25th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, my math teacher was sitting there on a program called Issues and Answers. It's kind of like, was a Meet the Press type show. And he was discussing what it was like to be not just at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, but up top on the Arizona when it was hit. And he lost his command. His command was below decks at that point. And he was the Marine in charge, and he was blown into the water. And, you know, it's just amazing to think about someone surviving that. And then here he was 25 years later talking about his experiences on, you know, at Pearl Harbor. That made quite an impression. And I also had an English teacher who was famous in a different way. He was a British colonel, and he was, if anyone remembers the movie Bridge on the River Kwai, that was Colonel Ferguson Warren, and he was the senior officer in the prison of war camp that was depicted in Bridge over the River Kwai. So a couple of amazing men, and just about all of my my teachers were retired military, but these two, they left such an impression. You know, it's tremendous. Anyway,
that really had a big impact on your on your formation, to have such heroes to look up to and to learn from. That's pretty amazing. So now your second internship was as a cub reporter for the Frederick News Post. What was your beat there?
Well, you know, here it's kind of amazing. Here I was, I guess, a sophomore at the time, and basically they gave me my own beat, which was cover the Montgomery County Council for the Frederick News Post. So once a week, there I was at the council meetings. Now, here's someone who's learning journalism and fascinated by journalism, but also interested in politics. It fed all of those things. So I had a bird's eye seat every week to the internal workings of the council. And that was fascinating. It also taught me a skill that served me well. And that was how to turn around a news story damn fast. Because often the council meetings would go till 2 or 3 o'clock. And if all things worked right, my story had to be on a Greyhound bus in Gaithersburg to get to Frederick. We got to remember, this is a few years ago. And so,
no fax machines, no internet, Greyhound buses.
We did have a very, very early fax machine. You put the paper around a spool, and it went round and round and around she went. And if you're lucky, it was decipherable on the other end of the up in Frederick. So it was either that or dictate the story. If they ran really late, I'd have to write the story in my head and dictate it. It was just an amazing time. But that again gave me, you know, it really served me well later, being able to take notes and formulate them into a story very quickly as the story was unfolding. So, you know, again, you can see how these things begin to give one life skills and point away that
exactly. Exactly. So was it at that point that you became the youngest publisher of a weekly newspaper?
No, I had a few hurdles to get through first. I had to graduate from Montgomery College, and then I went on to the University of Maryland, and I became one of the senior editors of the Diamondback, which was the daily newspaper there. So again, but for my work as editor of the paper at Montgomery College, and by the way, that happened about a month after I arrived at Montgomery College. The editor said, you know, I'm so pissed off about this Vietnam War. I'm going to leave school and go be a full-time anti-war protester. And by the way, I've recommended to Monty Pittner, who was the advisor of the paper, that you be editor. So I did that, but and we had such a great staff. Several of our staff on this community college paper ended up being professional journalists and professional photographers. Just amazing. Again, a real comment about the quality of the work, teaching and I guess pointing directions that Montgomery College did for them as well as for me.
So your internship, no, wait a minute, I think you might, didn't you work while you were in college also for the a newspaper in Bowie or something?
No, I graduated, after I graduated from the University of Maryland, I went over to Bowie. I was editor of a weekly paper there for a couple of years. And that was great because my ambition at the time was to run and perhaps buy a weekly newspaper. And it was during that couple of years when I was in Bowie that we began a search. I say we, but a member of my staff, when I was at the Spur at Montgomery College, he and I had agreed that we'd like to buy a weekly newspaper. Perhaps the only kind of paper we could afford was one that was failing, but it'd have to be failing for the right reason, so it might be possible to make a success of it. That was presumptuous to want to take on such a big thing, but he also had been editor of his daily paper and in college, and that was at the University of West Virginia, Morgantown, the Daily Athenaeum. And then he went into to journalism, working elsewhere. And meanwhile, we kept in touch. And then we began to do a survey of newspapers for sale along the Atlantic seaboard. And the one that we found, surprisingly, and ended up buying was the County Courier in Damascus, Maryland. And that worked very well for us. We were both very familiar with Upper Montgomery County, and we took that on.
You must have gotten some interesting stories, though, to cover at that point.
Oh, we did. And, you know, nothing like enthusiasm and youth and idealism to get one going. And you know, we realized that Upper Montgomery County was an area that was largely ignored by Rockville. And I think the same is probably still true because, you know, let's face it, the votes aren't in the Upper County. And especially back then when all members of the county council were elected by the entire county. So it really didn't matter what the people of Damascus or Poolesville or Germantown wanted because it was how Silver Spring, Rockville, Gaithersburg, Bethesda voted. And so as a result, one of the things that was great about having this paper was it really allowed us to be strong advocates for our region. And we kind of coined the term Up County, and we decided we wanted to be the advocates for the Up County. And it was sometime in the early, probably 73, 74, there was a bit of a recession. And Montgomery County at the time was in the middle of creating a lot of recreation, regional recreation facilities with basketball courts and a swimming pool and that kind of thing. And it was now the Up County's turn to get such a facility. And surprise, surprise, the county decided there just wasn't enough money with this downturn to do it. But there was enough money to give us the Goody landfill. So that kind of became our mantra. The Up County gets the trash, but we don't get a library. We don't get recreation facilities, but it's all right. They did give us the rest of the county's garbage.
There you go.
And that really kind of stung them. And the president of the council at the time was a gentleman named Dikran Hovsepian. And he was quite a gentleman and a great guy. I liked him quite a bit. But he was accusing me of having harsh editorials, pinning this trash, but not books and not recreation facilities on the council. He said, Lon, this is the tightest budget I've ever seen. There just is nothing to spare this time. You're just going to have a lot of patience. And as soon as we get through this, we will give you recreation. We will give you the library we promised you. Well, he says, in fact, he says, I challenge you to find something in the budget. Well, that's something that he probably shouldn't have done. I think he regretted that because I then told my staff that I was going to take a couple of days and go to the county library and ask them to take over for me. And, each project in the county budget has got a sheet and it's all put in these large binders. They're called PDFs, project description forms. And they're all put in large binders. And so I spent 2 days in a county library going page by page until I found what I was looking for. So I decided to put that across the front page of my paper, but the day came out, I also decided to hold a press conference down at the Goody landfill because the project I found was $50,000. Now remember, this is a long time ago, $50,000 was real money back then, that they were spending for a macadam runway for radio controlled model airplanes. And it was for a club. And actually the majority of members of the club were not even from Montgomery County. They were from the Washington, D.C. and Prince George's County. And Montgomery County was going to be the first county in the nation to own and operate a radio controlled model airport. And that was a $50,000 item. And I held a press conference about that. The media was quite good. They turned out and they covered that. And so that really, that made an impact. And I remember Mr. Hovsepian calling me and saying, Lon, why did you do that? Why didn't you call me? I didn't know that was there. Oh, so, it's fun what you can do with a newspaper. And if you're an honest advocate and work it hard. And I know that Poolesville has many of the same problems that Damascus does. That you're not first on anybody's list to get county money. In fact, didn't you tell me that Poolesville Seniors is actually not even paid for by the? Yeah.
Yep, it's the generous donations of our participants and the businesses in the area that keep us going. Yep.
I don't think that's the way it is in Bethesda.
Yeah, I doubt it. Yeah,
Rockville and Gaithersburg.
Yeah, I doubt it. But I'm going to remember never to challenge you, though. So then your internship with Congressman Goody led to a stint organizing Young Republicans for President Gerald Ford.
Well, it did actually. I have become active in Montgomery County Young Republicans. And with that, I actually became also active in the Maryland Young Republicans. And one thing led to another. And when the YRs had their annual convention that year, there was a primary contest. And at that time, it was between President Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan. And I was asked to lead the Ford contingent to that national convention. And I had And it's interesting because one of the guys who I was working quite closely with is now prominent in the news in a different way. But Paul Manafort was a Maryland Republican, and actually at that time, he was a young, I would say, a straight arrow. Obviously, things changed somewhat later in life for him, but I got to know Paul Manafort and worked with him some. But in any case, we had a really interesting thing happen at the convention. I had made an agreement with my counterpart who was there leading the Reagan forces, a guy named Roger Stone. And again, I think even that long ago, Roger was vying to be a dirty trickster. And clearly history has shown that he was successful at that. But we were on the last day of the convention, and Ronald Reagan was supposed to be the speaker. But Ronald Reagan was not able to show up. He got fogged in, I think, in Chicago, and they sent Jesse Helms in to represent him. And Jesse Helms stood up, and he got a standing ovation from the convention, and he made a joke. He said, I used to be embarrassed when I got a standing ovation, but I've come to realize that actually people have often been sitting for a long period of time, and they're looking for an opportunity to straighten out their underwear. So stand up and give an applause is a great way to do it. Well, he then went on to trash Gerald Ford and trash Gerald Ford and trash Gerald Ford during it. And I'm sitting there doing a slow burn. But anyway, a friend of mine at the time who was sitting with me, she was National YR Woman of the Year, and we were sitting at the head table, and the chairman of the convention says, "Now, do we have any more business?" And he's ready to bring this big gavel down on the convention. And this person jumps up and, Mr. Chairman. And he says, oh, the chair recognizes Bobby Kelly. And he said, why our Woman of the Year? And he said, what can I do for you? And he says, well, Mr. Chairman, some of us in this hall have not yet had the opportunity, as our illustrious speaker said, to adjust our underwear. So I'd like to ask everybody who supports the president to get up off your ass and adjust your underwear and support the president. Well, we had about 65 or 70% support in the room for the president. So that just brought the house down, as they say. And Roger Stone came roaring over at me and said, you broke our agreement. And he was in my face. You put her up to that. And at that point, Bobby turned and said, you don't know me very well, do you?
There you go.
Anyway, that's a story that I've relished over the years. But
that's a good one.
Well,
So after you did that, was that when you got hired by Montgomery College?
Yeah. As you remember, Gerald Ford lost and Jimmy Carter came in, and my visions of having a job in the administration kind of dissipated real quickly. And as a matter of fact, at that time, the college was working to begin the opening process of the Germantown campus. It was under construction, and classes were being held in high schools in the Up County. And I had to sit down with the president then, a very young guy. He was still in his 30s, Dr. Bill Strasser, a dynamic guy. And he had two needs, really, he said, that he thought I could help with. One was building support in the Up County for the Germantown campus to prepare for its opening, at which point they were hoping to have some 1,200 students or so. And in addition, he needed some help internally with PR. And it's funny, I remember I was going to start the following Monday. And he said, Lon, I know you don't start till Monday, but maybe could you come? The board has got a meeting. I think it was like on Thursday night. Do you think you could swing by that meeting and just sit there? He said, I think it'll be informative. I said, sure. Well, I went to that meeting, and at that meeting, the faculty presented a petition demanding the board remove Bill Strasser. And it was something like 320 to 12 or 15. It was an overwhelming vote. And of course, one of the reasons that that Bill was hiring me was to help him with relationships with the faculty. So my challenge was there, but actually this was interesting because the faculty were angry at him over the Germantown campus. They were absolutely convinced that there would not be resources enough to open the Germantown campus, and therefore the cost of opening the campus would come out of their pockets. And they were convinced it was going to lead to pay cuts, faculty cuts on those campuses, robbing faculty from those campuses to move them out to Germantown, etc. And so they were adamantly opposed to the construction of the Germantown campus and blamed Dr. Strasser for that. And frankly, Dr. Strasser was just carrying out the policy of the board. And of course, the board had worked this out with the county and with the state governments. So, but Bill was the whipping boy for them. And so I had some professional challenges, and they were wonderful.
And then you also taught there after you finished your stint with Dr. Strasser.
I did. In fact, one of the mentors in my life, Monty Pittner, who taught journalism there and was also the advisor to the Spur, he called me one day and said, Lon, I really need an adjunct prof to teach journalism writing at night. And I think you'd be great at it. And, would you do it? And it didn't take me very long to say, oh, absolutely. So I spent a couple of years teaching journalism at night, and it was a great experience. But interestingly, each of these things kind of fed my future career, and both the teaching and the work in the president's office, again, really advanced my career into the future. But we'll tell that story in a couple of minutes, I guess.
Well, I think we should tell that story now, because that's when you switched over to federal government, right?
Yep, absolutely. After Reagan was elected, I went looking for a job there, and I ended up as the public affairs director at the Merit Systems Protection Board, the spokesman for this little unheard of agency, the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board. And the Protection Board, of course, is responsible for hearing the appeals of fired or disciplined federal employees who thought that they were unfairly treated. Well, a funny thing happened. They had one PR person there, but Robert E. Poli took the air traffic controllers out on strike. And he did that because for many reasons, but one of the things that he thought was that the President Reagan, would never fire the air traffic controllers for striking because that was the first union to endorse him.
Oh.
Well, they may have endorsed him, but they didn't exactly have it right. He fired them. And suddenly, this little agency that handles 6,000 or 8,000 appeals a year on average, below everybody's radar, needed a national spokesman, someone to fly out to LAX and explain to the media out there what the heck a Merit Systems Protection Board hearing was. That's a quasi-judicial hearing, and et cetera, et cetera. And I was flying all over the country, doing press conferences, explaining the process for adjudicating these appeals, because in the period of a couple of months, we had 12,000 fired air traffic controllers who appealed, and each one of them was guaranteed an individual hearing on its merits to determine whether in fact they were going to stay fired. And it wasn't done by group. There were hearings for each, and each was considered on its own merits. So that suddenly got me quite a bit of attention in the news nationwide at a time that I thought I was going to be a sleepy little agency. So what fun. That again played into it, because Bill Bennett then was subsequently named Secretary of Education, and he needed a PR staff. And he came looking for me. And I was just amazed. Of course, one of the early questions was, well, if you're going to be a spokesman for the Department of Education, though, you need more than PR credentials. You got to have some academic bona fides. So what are your academic bona fides? Hey, I worked in the office of a president of one of the nation's foremost community colleges for 4 years. And I've taught journalism writing at night. So I have classroom experience. I've got college administrative experience. And Bennett got a big smile on his face, and the interview went very well. And
Obviously.
I was a press deputy for U.S. Secretary of Education. So it's interesting, isn't it, how Montgomery College at each point, fed into aspects of my career.
So were things pretty quiet at education when you were there?
No, especially not under Bill Bennett. Bill Bennett loved the spotlight, and we had a trip to Chicago that I remember well. There was a mayor of Chicago at the time was a guy named Washington, Harold Washington, and anyway, he and Bennett had been sparring back and forth, and they were the podium before, and Bennett got up and at one point and sarcastically congratulated the mayor. He said, "You just may have the worst big city education department in the United States, a school system in the United States." And Washington just leaned back and said, no, I don't. Detroit does. And Bennett got a big smile on his face. Well, I'm not sure I can refute that. But there was an unfortunate piece. It was just a few days after that actually the mayor died in office. And I remember Bennett saying to me at one point, he sure hoped that, that their back and forth hadn't had any impact on that. But there was also another thing that happened while we were on that trip. There, we had someone who had been nominated to be a Supreme Court justice. And let's see. He was.
Would that have been Ginsburg?
That was Ginsburg, Douglas Ginsburg, sorry. Anyway, and some stories came up that Ginsburg, who was a Harvard law professor, had been smoking dope with students. Well, Bill was just about ready to go out and to go on to stage in Chicago, and he turned to me and said, "Lon, call Bill Kristol." Now, Bill Kristol, who was also Harvard alum, was his chief of staff, and I reported to Bill, and he says, "Call Bill and ask him to do some sniffing around at Harvard. My suspicion is that he was probably smoking dope with students, and if that's the case, there's no way he's going to pass Senate confirmation." And he said, and I think the president needs to know that if that's the case, and Bill will have the contacts and be able to find out. And tell Bill that when we get back tonight, I'd like to have a discussion about that. So of course I did do that, and we arrived in Washington and went straight over to the office. And Bill convened a meeting with his general counsel and myself and Bill Crystal and a couple of other folks. So we sat around the secretary's table, and Bill reported that indeed on multiple occasions, people that Crystal knew said that they had seen Doug Ginsburg smoking dope with students. Well, Bennett said, the president needs to know this because there is no way he is going to gain confirmation in that. So he then turned around and called the White House. And we were sitting there, and the White House, the White House operator came on, and Bill explained that he needed to speak with the president if it was convenient. And she said she would pursue that and give him a call back either way. A few minutes later, we heard the phone ring and saw the red button on the secretary's phone blinking. And sure enough, it was the operator, and she said, please hold for the president. And we sat there, and Bill explained to President Reagan what he had found out and said, at some point, this man is going to be a huge embarrassment for you, Mr. President. You just can't let this go forward. He said, well, Bill, and the president said to him, well, Bill, what's your advice? And he said, I think somebody needs to call him and tell him he's got to resign, withdraw from his Supreme Court nomination. Well, and he said, and the president said, do you know him? He says, well, I do know him. I'm not good friends with him, but I certainly know him. He said, well, why don't you do that and let me know? And it ended there. Well, God, I was stunned at that. But in any case, I thought, okay, this is something I have to let everybody know in the morning. This has some huge potential. Well, I didn't expect Bennett to make the call that night, nor did I expect Bennett just to call him. But Bennett being Bennett, he called Doug and related his conversation with Reagan and told him he had to withdraw. Now, remember, the Attorney General knows nothing of this. I mean, this just totally outside. It's just amazing. Well, I took the subway back to Rockville, got my car, drove to Olney, where my home was. And when I got there, my wife was standing in the doorway and said, what the hell is going on? I said, what are you talking about? And she hands me this list. Back then, before cell phones. And she said, every major news organization is waiting for a call from you. ABC, NBC, CBS, they're not getting any. And so anyway, obviously, one thing I came to know later, almost in fact, that night, was that Bill Crystal was a terrific leaker. He knew how to use the media. And he leaked what happened after the president called and had that conversation with Ginsburg. Well, the first person I had to call was the president's press secretary, Marlin Fitzwater. And I realized I had made a mistake. Fitzwater was screaming at me, you don't think that the White House needs to know about this little call? That I needed to know about this little call? He said, I got everybody wanting to know what they're trying to confirm this story. He reamed me, but good. And I asked him then if he wanted me to call and confirm or whether he would handle it. And he left some for me and he took some and we made calls and confirmed the story. I can only imagine how Ed Meese must have felt at that point. I think he was the Attorney General. Just an amazing, amazing thing. Anyway, but that was the kind of thing that, Bennett was he was a born newsmaker. And if the media was your interest, he was a great guy to work for.
So then you left the feds behind and became the spokesman for the beer industry. Did they pay you in free samples?
Oh, one of the great things about that job, I got to go to some, Anheuser-Busch and Coors golf tournaments. That was a good time. But I had a phone number, which was kind of fun. It was 202-737-BEER. All my buddies were just
Jealous.
just envious. What can I
Yeah.
say? And yeah, there were a lot of free samples. We had a bar in the office. And one thing that was funny, when one of the companies was coming to town, the brew that we had on tap changed immediately. Now, if Coors was coming to town, of course, we were serving nothing but Coors in the office that day. It was kind of an amazing thing. But after a couple of years, I decided that really wasn't the job for me. But the one great thing that job did for me, well, two great things actually.
Yeah.
But one great thing was that I became literally a national expert on drunk driving, because I had to field calls every day on drunk driving, and I had to know the stats. I had to go and testify before Congress on drunk driving measures, and sometimes out to the state legislatures to testify as well. So that was one thing it did for me. But there's another, perhaps more important thing that it did for me now. I tell everybody that I met my wife, Claudia, over a beer. And that's actually pretty close to what happened. I was vice president of the Beer Institute. She was vice president of the Beer Wholesalers Association. And we met at a beer convention in Las Vegas. So we met over a beer.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. It was.
Then you moved to AAA and you were with them 21 years before retiring.
I was.
Is that the longest you were anywhere?
Yeah, it was. But it was a great ride. The organization gave me enormous freedom to be a representative for motorists. And it's interesting, everybody has representatives, but if you think about it, everybody thinks, well, why do motorists need to be represented? Well, they especially need to be represented because, there's how are our budgets spent? Are they, how is road money spent? Whole lot of different things. How about the laws that are passed concerning the dangers on the road, such as distracted driving, such as drunk driving, such as teenage drivers, and make the rules. Motorists ought to have input into that. And I was the head lobbyist and spokesman for AAA, and that gave me freedom to focus on certain things. And about that time, we had a crisis on the GW Parkway. And that gave me one of my biggest professional victories ever, really. But at that time, the Park Service seemed to be making the argument that the GW Parkway was not a high-speed commuter route. It was a bucolic parkway entrance to Washington, D.C., populated by tourists. And of course, no one would ever speed on that road. And as a result, they had almost no barrier separation. There was a 5-mile stretch on at the time that had no barrier separation except for literally a 4 or 5 inch curb and maybe a couple of feet of concrete. But what happened, not once, not twice, but in a period, in a very short period of time, within a year or so, we had about 6 head-on collisions with fatal consequences, where someone loses it on one side and there's no barrier and they're both doing 60, 65, 70 miles an hour. And what you get is mayhem. Well, believe it or not, there were a lot of people that were against any kind of barrier separation on the parkway. They said that would putting putting a guardrail in, for example, would desecrate this parkway. And my response to that is, you don't think that a couple of vehicles looking like a bomb hit them and body parts all over the parkway desecrates the parkway? And anyway, after a particularly bad head-on collision, I held a press conference on the parkway and said that AAA was declaring war on the George Washington Parkway, and it would be war until they got their heads out of the sand at the Park Service and recognized that it was a high-speed commuter route and did all of the things for the parkway that a high-speed commuter route required under federal law. Well, I had that on a Tuesday. A Saturday night, my wife and I were in a movie theater in Wheaton Plaza, and my pager went off, and it was Megan McGrath. And she called me and she said, "Lon, there's been another head-on fatal collision on the parkway. And because of your press conference Tuesday, everybody is here. Can you come over? We'll wait for you." So I drove over there and had a press conference. And the next morning, I got on the phone to Frank Wolf and the other two congressmen, Tom
Davis.
Tom Davis, yeah, and Jim
Moran.
Yep, anyway, all three of them had a piece of the GW Parkway going through their district, and actually two of the three, Jim and Frank, they were really interested. I talked to each of them and I said, "Look, the sharks of the media are in a feeding frenzy. You could do your constituents and the region a big favor and jump on this issue right away. It's hurting. It impacts your constituents. It impacts drivers throughout the region." And and I was really pleased. Both said yes and yes, and that they would pursue it immediately. Well, I then got a call from Frank Wolf's administrative assistant a couple of hours later, and telling me that 2 days later, I guess on Wednesday, there would be a press conference on the GW Parkway. They wanted me to come and be with them, announcing that within 6 months, their construction on barrier separation on the parkway would begin after 10 years of study and not being able to find the money. These two powerful members of Congress suddenly swung the balance. And, and since that time, there has not been, to my knowledge, another head-on collision. Not to say we haven't had some fatal collisions in the parkway, we have, but the biggest source of fatal collisions was ended. And I was very proud of that accomplishment.
That is amazing, and it's amazing that people didn't see it, and that you had to fight so hard for it. That's good work, Lon. Do you want to talk about the derecho?
Oh, yeah, that's another example of policy idiocy, this time on behalf of Maryland. But I'm sure everyone remembers the derecho. I think it was in July, early July 2012. Well, if you remember, the Weather Force, the National Weather Service, tracked the derecho across the country, so everyone knew when it was hitting, and it was devastating. It certainly left the Washington area devastated. I remember that I had one car totaled in my driveway. from one of the trees that took down, and a hole punched in my roof, and et cetera, et cetera.
People
But
didn't have electricity for weeks.
it was horrible. But you know, I started getting calls from motorists who said, "Did you know about the Bay Bridge?" And I said, "What? Tell me about it." Well, the Bay Bridge had a policy, the authority, that they would not close traffic down on the bridge until the weather was actually there. So when the derecho hit, the Bay Bridge was full of cars. Now it started moving. People thought their cars were going to be blown off. They, in the middle of this driving rain and thunderstorm, they were winding their windows down. They were opening their roofs so that the air would flow through their car so that it might not be blown over. They were calling home, saying their last goodbyes, absolutely believing that they were going to die being thrown off the Bay Bridge by that storm. And I didn't get one call or two. I got over a dozen calls. So, you know, I then confirmed with the Maryland Transportation Authority that they had this policy, that they would not close the bridge until the weather got there. Well, I contacted the editorial page of the Baltimore Sun and said, how would you like to have an op-ed on what happened on the Bay Bridge? And I fed that, and I also gave them the names of the AAA members that I had spoken with who had been called on the bridge. And so they did a story, but they gave me the top half of the right side of the editorial spread that day, demanding that action be taken to allow the Bay Bridge Authority close off traffic before weather hit, that they didn't have to wait for the winds to hit first or the weather to hit first. And, you know, I remember later that day getting a call from the Transportation Secretary, Maryland, saying, Lon, I got a call first thing this morning from the governor. It wasn't pleasant. I wish you'd talk to me about it first. But the deed was done. The policy was changed.
That's a good thing.
I'm very proud of that too.
That's a good thing.
Sometimes bureaucracy, Gene knows this. I mean, the right combination of things can be done and you make progress. And you know, I was in that position at AAA and AAA really, it was a great place to work because they gave not just me, but I had wonderful staff. My staff and I, great latitude to do what we thought we needed to do to save lives and protect motorists.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess we probably need to just wrap this up a little bit, but like Connie Morella, you certainly didn't retire when you left 3A. You rewired and you've spent a lot of time continuing your award-winning photography, and you even went back to your original profession in newspapers.
Well, that's right. And one thing I didn't mention, again, Montgomery College really set me up for this, but when I was editor of the Spur, I had a photography staff. And my photographers, two of them who became professional photographers, Les Hennig and Joe McCary, ended up being professionals. And Joe just died a couple of years ago, but Les is still a practicing professional photographer. Anyway, one of the photographers sold me my first single lens reflex camera and showed me how to operate it, took me into the dark room, showed me how to develop film. And then I took a photography course at the college. Well, you know, a few years later, in between all the other things I did, I owned a camera store and photo studio. So again, the fingerprints of the college were all over that as well. But you're right. We retired to what had been our second home in West Virginia. And there I did a lot more photography. And I also became a reporter for the weekly newspaper, the Moorfield Examiner, covering land use policy.
Oh, my heavens.
Let me tell you, it sounds boring, but land use policy turns out to be, especially in an agricultural area, turns out to be a pretty hot potato. So
Well, yep,
I was,
it's often the meat of the matter, you know?
well, that's true. So it was so in retirement, I was doing that. And I also took on, I became the president of the board of the Kakapen Institute, which promoted clean water in Appalachia. And that was a wonderful institute too, that helped me do some good things for the environment. So I'm a pretty busy guy.
Well, Lon, you've had an amazing career, a varied career, and we really thank you so much for explaining how Montgomery College was really the inspiration for so many of the various things that you've accomplished in your life. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Dottie, do you want to open it up for questions and just people to say hi to Lon?
Yeah, we can go ahead and open it up for questions. And should I just flip through the pictures while we answer questions?
Oh, yeah, that would be fun. Yeah, let's do that.
We have some pictures Lon shared with us that we're going to share with you. Can everyone see them okay?
I sure can.
All right, so if we'd like to open it up for questions, feel free to unmute or send them in the chat.
Lon, if you want to comment on them as they come through.
Oh, okay. Well, that, of course, that was a picture, obviously, with George Bush and Barbara at an event. In fact, the event that was taken at happened to be up in New York at United Negro College Fund. And an interesting thing happened there. The president said, at the time I was the spokesman for Secretary Cavazos, and he said, "Secretary Cavazos is here?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, ask Laura to come over and talk to me for a moment. And so I went and got the secretary and took him back, and he said the president said to Dr. Cavazos, and he said, "Laura," he said, "I got the plane here. If you'd like to come back to DC tonight on Air Force One." I'm like, yes. And and Dr. Cavazos, "No, I've got to give a speech up here tomorrow morning. We've already got our hotel rooms. We'll just stay up here." I said, "Dr. Cavazos, we could take the Metroliner back up here tomorrow." And no, we'll just stay. So that's the story of how I lost my chance to get a ride on Air Force One. There's Dr. Cavazos. He had been the president of Texas Tech, and George Bush brought him up to be Secretary of Education. And what a delightful gentleman, a professor at Tufts University and just a wonderful, wonderful educator. Oh my gosh. There I am, a Spur editor on the left there. And on the right, of course, that's Hubert Humphrey campaigning for president. One of his stops in Maryland when he was barnstorming. One of the things I got to do, in journalism, of course, was go out and cover news events and often take pictures as well. And it was fun being able to go out and take pictures of Hubert Humphrey and talk about an impassioned speaker. He was terrific. Oh boy.
More recent pictures.
Now, you probably recognize Wendy Rieger, and the other gentleman you may not know, Andy Ockershausen, but he's a well-known figure in the Washington metropolitan area. For many years, he was the head of WMAL. He was the general manager of WMAL in its heyday when it was Hardin and Weaver and Bill Trumbull and Chris Core. And anyway, he was perhaps the supreme mover and shaker in this town. And unfortunately, just a few weeks ago, he died. And anyway, that's a picture taken a couple of years ago at a reception, but both good friends.
And then you're there with the grand dame of Montgomery College, Bernice Grossman.
Absolutely. How long did she work for the college? Was it
Jessica would know that. Jessica, how long did she work for the college? Oh, you're muted.
20, I think around 20 years, maybe a little over 20 years.
But she
And
was,
she
she
worked
was
for
almost 90 or something when
Yeah.
she retired, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was
I
amazing.
think she was in her 90s when she retired.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think
She was
I
an
think I hired her
amazing-
when she was 74.
Wow, wow.
an
So-
amazing inspiration for us all, and
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
those friends that you just cherish.
Dottie, are there any questions in the chat, or do people want to?
I haven't seen any in the chat yet. I can go ahead and stop share. I might be able
Okay.
to see them then.
All right, well, if no one has any questions,
This is our last call, everybody. Feel free to unmute or send them in the chat.
just want to say hi, you can do that.
So I just have to say that this was such an interesting travel through your career. Tookie, just a great job with questions, and Lon, it's so interesting to hear, how you thought you were going to go to the Naval Academy and ended up at Montgomery College, which I told you it earlier that I absolutely love. So, and just to see that, everything that you were involved in is so interesting to see where, sometimes you just need to trust what's going to happen, and look at what happened to you.
That's exactly right. A lot of twists and turns and things I never would have planned for myself, probably, but in the end, it's all been good. What a life, it's just great. And it's the consummate irony I mentioned earlier. A college I didn't want to go to has led the way through my life. I mean, it just, everywhere I turned, I thought, damn. But for something that happened at Montgomery College, it might have been very different.
For sure, for sure. All right,
Well, I would just like to say myself, again, thank you so much. And I went to Montgomery College myself before I transferred to University of Maryland. And I agree, it's just outstanding in the way that it prepares you for life. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's presentation as much as I did and learned something new. Of course, if you think of any questions later, you can always email us at info@pleasantvilleseniors.org. If you'd like to unmute or turn on your camera to say goodbye, now's the time. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, please leave a like and a comment. We'd like to thank Tookie for hosting this interview, as well as Lon. Thank you so much for your presentation.
And Dottie and
We-
Tookie, thank you for working with me, and it's been a real pleasure, and I appreciate it very much.
the pleasure's
you.
ours.
Yeah, it
And,
was
uh,
awesome.
And I got to jump in and say, Lon, that's a great shirt you're wearing.
John,
Love it.
John, I just wanted you to know that that money you spent on Alumni Association shirts for me is not being wasted.
Hey, Lon, I had no idea. Although you are the reason why I went to Montgomery College as well. But I've known you for quite a few years, but the early stories I did not know. So we'll have some fun talking about that at Capon.
Okay.
I have one quick question. It's IJ.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
What letter grade would you give journalists today in covering domestic news?
Wow.
In covering what?
Domestic news, politics, you name it.
That's, I think that mainstream media are doing a fair job, but they're the rules have changed. We now have, as you know, media 24/7. And, I think though that, media is behind the 8 ball. We haven't figured out what to do exactly because, I think one of the reasons America has been so successful and we're called the melting pot was because we all watched the same news. I mean, you had ABC, NBC, CBS, and Metro Media when I was growing up, and PBS. But that was it. And we all, and objectivity was very important. And one of the worst things as a news professional that you could be accused of was not being appropriately objective. And, the thought that you'd have a right-wing news outlet like Fox News, it just, heck, I remember when, I remember that we had some of the big shots at at the stations lose their jobs when they found when a letter was used improperly, or Dan Rather lost his job over a letter concerning George W. Bush and the military. And I remember on NBC they had I guess it was a story about rear end crashes and or side impact crashes. I can't remember which, but in any case, turned out that everything in the video wasn't as it was supposed to be, and heads rolled there. So to get back to what you said, the media has been being challenged right now to get the truth, report the truth as like never before. The challenges they face are gargantuan, and I feel for those who are honestly trying, and for the others like Tucker Carlson, I hope there's a warm place in hell for him.
There's a question in the chat that wants to know, what did it mean to you when the last administration ceased having press conferences?
Well, that's interesting. It really sent a very strong signal about what we're getting out of the White House. It was not to be an exploration of what people are interested in, or a desire to make sure that the public gets the truth. It was an exercise in propaganda, and what was going to be put out was what the president wanted to be put out, and answers given were what the president wanted, and often unfortunately had little to do with facts on the ground. But reporters still had the obligation to ask those questions, and sometimes all you could do is shake your head at the answers they got. But that again points to the problem that our democracy has. The fact that suddenly White House news briefings on behalf of the president had very little credibility. Wow. And I have to say right now that our current White House press secretary is, I think, doing a tremendous job in trying to restore the job of the White House press secretary, which is dispense information to the best of his or her ability. And how, it's different.
Sure, for sure. A sign of the
Tricky
times.
question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all your insight and stories about your life and career. It was so fascinating. And like Tookie and Melissa mentioned earlier, if you guys would like to join us next week with IJ Hudson, we will be back looking at some pictures from his career. Absolutely fascinating. We had an amazing presentation last time he was with us, so I highly encourage you to check out our website and register. We'd also like to thank, of course, our ongoing private contributors and sponsors. They do so much to help us keep putting on these presentations for you, which we love so much.